In November of 2021, the video game developing company Atlus released the 5th numbered installment in their Shin Megami Tensei series. I went in extremely clueless on what the game itself would be like. I knew vaguely that SMT was a JRPG series with notoriously difficult combat and seemingly complex storytelling based off of everything I'd seen. I also knew, according to limited research, also known as reddit.com/r/megaton, that the series has a very devoted fan base, which offered me a ton of optimism about the game's potential. My interest was extremely motivated by marketing, fandom hype, and my revamped interest in JRPGs thanks to recently playing Dragon Quest XI. Great game. So I pre-ordered, which is something I almost never do, and waited patiently for release day. Hi there, my name is Salvo, as far as you know, and this is Shin Megami Tensei V. First things first, I will be talking some big time spoilers in this video. So if you aren't down with that, feel free to buy the game, play all 4 endings, and come back to watch this video. Alright, if y'all want to know what I think without any meandering verbosity, here it is. Shin Megami Tensei V is extremely cool. Until it isn't. So there you go. That's the gist of how I feel, and I'm going to talk about that a little more in depth now. SMT5 made an incredibly strong first impression on me. The character models looked really nice, especially for the Switch, and when you first get into the game's main overworld, the environments are immediately striking. The first thing that comes to mind is the lighting effects bouncing off the sand. But you don't start the game in the sand world of Dot, but rather in a normal-looking Tokyo. You open with a fairly brief introduction to a few different characters and a pretty quick transition into the meat of the game itself. Essentially, you start out as a high school kid, if you can imagine such a world, and you very quickly come to find out that the Tokyo your protagonist lives in is technically not real. I don't want to overwhelm you right off the bat, but buddy, I don't know how to talk about this game without overwhelming and/or killing one of us. Basically, Capital G God was killed by Lucifer before the events of SMT5, but during the war leading up to this violent dethroning, Capital G God created an alternate reality dimension Tokyo kind of situation. You don't really find out all this until much later, so as a first timer to the series, I was pretty bewildered by the game's opening events. There's a lot of moving parts going on. All you really need to know is that you and your friends are dimension shifted into Dot, which is the quote-unquote real world that was destroyed in the war between demons before old Capital G created the alternate reality. So from there, your guy pretty much immediately decides that this man from the sky, who is named Aogami, is trustworthy and shakes his hand to bond with him, becoming a Nahobino in the process. You come to find out later that being a Nacho Bean Boy was forbidden by old Capital G, and you're the first one to do this in a real long time, or something to that effect, and you just kind of oopsie into it. I definitely thought initially that a Nahobino was like a chosen one situation, where you are like the only Nahobino around, but the story illuminates you to the fact that pretty much any god/demon can be a Nacho Bean Boy by fusing with a person that has their quote-unquote knowledge. Okay, I can tell that was a lot. Let me slow down for a second. I feel like I'm getting ahead of myself. Right, so once you get past the opening section, this game boils down to being a very challenging JRPG with unique character customization options and super fun team building. Veterans of the series are almost definitely going to roll their eyes at this part of the video, and I'm sorry, I promise I'm doing my best, but I am now going to try to explain the combat of SMT5. So it's essentially traditional JRPG turn-based combat, but you have a party of 4 that battle in turns. Each turn is represented by an icon at the top of the screen. And if you hit an enemy with a move they're weak to, or if you land a critical hit, the icon representing the character you're attacking with will start blinking. If you have a blinking icon, you've basically bought yourself an extra turn. And you can totally wipe out turns if your attack misses, which throws a little extra drama into it. The enemy also benefits from this same press turn system, so you have to be mindful of your own team's weaknesses as well. This basically leads to fighting boss battles at least once as a test run to see what they're weak to or whose ass they kick on your team, and then adjusting accordingly. Or you can just buy a bunch of spyglasses and gems, shards and stuff from the shop and just completely cheese them, but just keep that strategy between you and me, alright? I've heard people describe SMT as basically Pokemon with demons, which I mean, I guess, but calling SMT5 Pokemon with demons kind of feels like calling Sonic the Hedgehog Bubsy with a blue guy. Like, yeah, sure, technically they're both platformers, but SMT5 combat feels significantly less tedious and much more challenging than Pokemon. And I know people just say that for the sake of brevity when trying to explain the concept to people who are unfamiliar. I'm being difficult, and I know that. I'm trying to be better. But I'm just saying, for those who have never played any of these games and are expecting Pokemon, it's not really that much like Pokemon. For one thing, the gameplay loop is ridiculously satisfying. Everything you do in SMT5 serves the purpose of making your character and your party stronger. Too often modern games get bogged down with little doohickeys and doodads that get stored away in a menu somewhere and hoarded to oblivion, setting up for some nebulous situation that never occurs. But in SMT5, it's all fairly simple. You can find these Memon, which is this game's equivalent of Breath of the Wild Koroks, but with better rewards, to gain points to grant yourself or your party different miracles or skills. You also pick up items of different rarities that serve basically no purposes other than being sold in the shop or very rarely as mission items. Almost everything you pick up in SMT5 gets used in some way or another to make you or your party stronger, which is really good because if you aren't constantly getting stronger in this game, the enemies and bosses will absolutely punish you for it. Probably the largest looming specter going into this game was the proposed difficulty. Everywhere you look, game players and writers alike were telling me, these here Shin Megami Tenseis are hardcore. You better come with your big boy belt on. And naturally, when I sat down to play the game, I tightly buckled my big boy belt, ready for the fight of my life. And no doubt, on my first playthrough, this game was extremely difficult, especially for the first third of the game, roughly speaking. Simple encounters with demons in the overworld were giving me a hard time, and then I ran into the gosh darn Hydra. This guy whooped my ass so bad that I had to rethink how I was playing the game entirely. I started actually thinking about attack order, attacking weaknesses, and gasp, grinding. I definitely would not call my gameplay choices optimal in any sense of the word, but after the Hydra fight, I definitely recommitted myself to learning more about the gameplay. And do not get me wrong, I still got bonked around pretty solidly for the rest of this playthrough, but I at least felt like I was in control of the battles I participated in to some degree. So, with all this talk of teams of demons, how do you get yourself one of these here dream teams of deems? Well, you can recruit demons by negotiating with them instead of fighting them, and there's all kinds of factors hidden in the negotiation that remain a total mystery to me. I basically fumbled my way through multiple attempts before I was able to recruit most of the demons, but sometimes you can guess your way through and recruit them on your first try. Just be sure your level is higher than theirs, or they'll tell you quite literally to heck off and try again later. And if your talking ain't so good, there's also Demon Fusion, which is where I think the game truly shines. At the save points, you're able to go into the World of Shadows, which is pretty much just a party upgrade management screen. Here you can upgrade your party through the previously mentioned miracles, inherent essences that can change different demon skill sets, as well as fuse demons to create new, stronger party members. This is crucial to progression in SMT5, especially because once your party members reach a certain level threshold, most of the time their usefulness severely drops off. They stop leveling as quickly and their damage production becomes borderline useless, except for the GOATs, Yoshitsune and Finn McCool, my beloved. I initially really didn't like this, but I grew to appreciate the game prompting me through gameplay to experiment with new, stronger demons, and I slowly started to look forward to new demons I would unlock to make my team stronger. I still don't totally love it, but only because it sort of feels impossible to beat the game with a team of more basic demons. No amount of strategy will really make a run like that feel worth it. I don't want to dwell on it too long, so real quick I'd like to touch on the music for this game. Unfortunately, I just do not very much care for it. Most of it's fine, and some of it is enjoyable even, but the main battle theme that you hear more than almost any other track is kinda dog water. I disliked it enough that I now kind of like it, ironically, and something about the droning synth melody really hits my brain wrong. No disrespect to anyone that does like it, however, it's just not for me. But I do like a little of that boss battle music. And the overworld theme is pretty chill too. A huge draw to this game for me is the amount of gods and mythologies represented within it. I was really excited to be able to fight and recruit so many mythological characters, especially some of those you unlock a little later in the game. The game does a really good job offering a small bio for each demon, and the designs are almost always really good. You have the great and powerful Finn McCool, my king, who I have already mentioned and will continue to mention, Sarasvati, who has a sick-ass sitar, and of course, this unique character. I believe he is a banana-shaped character, possibly inspired by the famous Donkey Kong from the Mario Kart series. There's 221 different demons to build your party with before DLC, so there's certainly a lot to learn about and work with. One of my favorite experiences with this game was unlocking a new god or demon that I didn't know a darn thing about, reading their bio, googling more about them, and watching YouTube videos about them. Shout out to Overly Sarcastic Productions for the mythological education. Y'all check them out. The game is worth your time alone for the amount of mythology and religious fun facts you learn in the process. Plenty of people have talked about the story of SMT5, and I have honestly never heard a positive word about it. Unfortunately, man, it's for a good reason. I really didn't like much of anything about the overarching plot of SMT5. Based on the little bit I had read about the series, I was expecting SMT5 to have a fairly nuanced and intricate plot based around the nature of humanity and religion. Something in that realm at least. Keeping expectations low. Unfortunately, those ideas are mostly just gestured toward, but never meaningfully engaged with. There are a handful of side quests that give you like 2 different factions with conflicting ideals to side with, and these are kind of interesting, but those are honestly the most interesting choices in the game for me. Other than those, you also have some dialogue choices that feel inconsequential, but factor into your character's alignment. And man, the choice at the end of the game felt so bizarre and rushed that I was honestly surprised that the game was over so quickly. To boil it down, the very basic plot is that angels and demons are at a war due to Big G no longer being around. Your goal is to end the conflict, essentially. You're placed into a branch of Bethel, an organization formerly led by Big G, and it's up to you if you want to side with them by the end of the game. Eventually you have to fight other gods for the throne of creation, allowing you to choose the future that you want. Or, at least you can try to, but the game really doesn't give you too many great options there. There's 4 different endings to this game, one of which is the quote-unquote true ending, which you can only get by completing some high-level side quests. The ending I got on my first playthrough was frankly some friggin' beans, dude. I chose to destroy the throne so humanity could forge its own path, and the game basically outright said, "Damn, really? You messed that up, Chief."
The throne! What foolishness! Chaos will no doubt continue to grip this world.
From what I've seen of the other endings, they're not exactly much better, and most of that is due to the characters involved. This brings me to my biggest issue with SMT5. While the plot itself is underwhelming, there's at least some cool ideas that it tries to play with, but man, these characters are basically non-existent. Right off the bat, you're introduced to this small group of friends that even get a little zoom in and text splash on the screen. This implies that there'll be of some importance to the story or to your character's arc. Unfortunately, man, they're just neither of those things. The main cast consists of Tao Isanokami, your quote-unquote friend who has a very confusing character arc, Yuzuru Atsura, your quote-unquote friend who you find out can control demons and works for Bethel, Ichiro Dazai, your quote-unquote friend who gets sucked into Dot by accident at the beginning of the game along with you, Miyazu Atsura, your quote-unquote friend who is probably the least important character in the entire game, Hayako Shimizu, the leader of the branch of Bethel that you end up fighting for. He and Yuzuru eventually decide to go on their own path, trying to instate the myriad Japanese gods as the new rulers in old Capital G's absence. And then you also have Amanazako, a demon that follows you around, I believe specifically to annoy you. And of course, Shohei Yakumo and Nuwa, 2 characters that you stumble upon on your journey through Dot, fighting for their own beliefs separate from Bethel and the other demons. I will say, to their credit, that I mostly like everyone's look and design, with the exception of this hat, but we'll get into that. I'll also say that Tokyo itself feels very lifeless to me, and I think a large part of that is that you spend pretty much no time in it, so you never really feel any connection to it. On top of that, NPCs are literally faceless and nameless. Extremely hard to feel anything other than nothing strong about this. After the initial introductions and once you get into Dot, you go on to have a run-in with this cast of characters and a few others at random intervals as you travel through the world. I found myself far more attached to the demons and side quest characters of the world than my quote-unquote friends, due to how much more time I spend with demons and side quest characters. Even if their dialogue wasn't impactful in the overall story, they were at least entertaining. The game spends next to no time fleshing out its main characters or their relationship to the player. This wouldn't be too much of an issue if I wasn't clearly supposed to care when certain events happen to these people that I know nothing about. Like, for example, when Tao dies, or when Tao returns but then randomly leaves you at the end of the game on the neutral ending. And listen, I know this is because she doesn't agree with my choice, but it's super anticlimactic for her to have this dramatic transformation and then just dip. Another reason why the neutral ending feels like the game saying, wrong choice, bucko. Or when Dazai has his character moment. This is one of the most ridiculous moments I've ever experienced in a video game. Throughout the entire game, Dazai is a bit of a dope. He's quite literally wearing a hat that says sucker directly on top of his dopey head. But when he fully commits his loyalty to Ola capital G, he takes off the sucker hat and he's suddenly a suave, smartass type guy, clearly indicating to us that he's a bad guy now. It's beyond silly to the point that even if it's purposefully silly, it's just a little too much. It feels to me like the game wants you to go with the myriad gods path to me alongside Yuzuru and Koshimizu, because siding with Bethel makes Dazai your ally, which seems like an objectively bad choice. And going with neutral aligns you with Shohei Yakumo, who I initially liked a lot until his rhetoric went all, the strongest will survive type beat. There's no really satisfying choice, unfortunately, which, to be fair, that may be the point. Shin Megami Tensei V is extremely cool, until it isn't. But it's still really cool. I wanted to structure this video sort of like my experience with the game itself. It started off super positive, petered out into pretty negative opinions in the story, but at the end of the day, I think net positively of this game. It's not insanely long, so there's replayability to it, and even if the characters and story are mostly unmemorable or lackluster, the demons and gods themselves are entertaining enough to make the experience worth it, and the gameplay itself is intensely satisfying as a newcomer to the series. On top of that, the ideas presented throughout the story are, at the very least, intriguing, if not disappointingly unexplored. I do plan to play more games in the series in the future, so if any Megami Tensei fans have watched this far, please let me know your favorites. If you haven't played SMT5, I still recommend giving it a shot. It's a solidly challenging game that's surprisingly accessible, with a lot of personality in its demon designs. Finn McCool forever.